So, I decided to focus on the role of pain and fear in Proteus, sexuality's entanglement with pain. Um, yeah. So I kind of separated my statement in like three main points. So the first one is private exchanges of pain versus public exchanges of pain. There are like a couple scenes where there's like this like interplay and it structures, I guess, the dynamics of power and the person or I guess, the sexual identity that is being punished. And I also want to talk about the role of fear in the dynamics of power and sexualities. I think fear plays like an integral role in the power and the sexual relations. Sorry, I'm just gonna switch because there's a sound that's bothering me. Sorry. Okay. And then I want to finish by making like some parallels to BDSM culture. So there's a lot of like links, I think. Not like I'm also relating it a little bit to the Foucault reading, but anyways, yeah, I'm just gonna get on with it because I'm being slow. Okay. So on public displays of pain, torture and punishment. So the first display of like or exchange of pain that I saw a lot in the film were like the public ones. So they're kind of like these rituals of humiliation and torture. They become like these spaces. I see them a lot as like pain exorcism, especially like these kinds. This was like a little screen cap. I'm sorry, I should have given like a warning because they're like two very intense screen caps from the movie. But yeah, so this one is just to give a bit of context, it's like a really quick flash that happens in the movie where they show this like public torture and there's like the crowd behind that's like chanting. And so this is like a classic example of like societal pain exorcism and how like I related it to the reading by Jane Ward where she talks about like straight people having few opportunities to grieve the disappointments of straight culture, because how does one speak about the failure of the very system that defines people's success? So it's like I see this like channeling of pain as a way for like people to like, I guess, like uh do like a sort of like catharsis of like this like pain and like the pain of straightness that they carry, or the pain of like, yeah, having to be straight. And not just like, I mean, I don't mean straight as just like sexually in this like as a sexual orientation, but just straight as like a way of living. And yeah. And then also this other one is like a fear reinforcement, like a threat to remain straight. Like this happens immediately like after Blank and Jacobs are like kind of like, not flirting, but like they're like, you know, like I don't have the word in English, like he's takin. Um and then this guy gets caught and whatever. Um Okay, then the private exchanges of of pain and fear. So the role of fear in their sexual chemistry. So like the first time that they kind of like have like an intimate like exchange is in the scene where Blank uses his knife, and like it's like this kind of like exchange of like controlling one another, and they're kind of like, you know, it's very like aggressive and sexual as attention. But basically this is a quote that I brought from the Foucault reading. These attractions, these evasions, these circular incitements have traced around bodies and sexes, not boundaries, not to be crossed, but perpetual spirals of power and pleasure. So it's like this, like I saw these like cycles in their interaction as a way of like playing with the pleasure, but also like switching who's in charge. And yeah. Then I talk a little bit about pain in relation to sodomy, because you know their sexual rapport are all sodomy. Like there's no oral pleasure being giving, so like it's like really about enduring the pain for the other and like building this trust. So I think that's like a key choice, that there's no like mutual pleasure given. It's really like a thing of like enduring pain. And in contrast, like Jacobs doesn't endure pain from like the power of the state. Like, you know, like in the end in the end of the movie where he after he confesses, he says like, he tells Blank, I'm not a real man, I can't stand pain, but like ultimately he's been standing this sort of like pain throughout the movie. It's like a pain pleasure, but like for Blanc, but he won't do it for straight culture. And then the comparison with BDSM. So basically I wanted to kind of compare the executioner to the figure of the Gimp. So the Gimp is like a BDSM figure of this like it's a kind of like submissive archetype, but ultimately he's like an object of service, of suffering, and of silence. Like they're really an object. And so the executioner in the film is this kind of figure. He's like an object of the state of power, and he's kind of like becoming this medium for society's pain and their suffering. Like he's ultimately doing like this screen cap is from the one I did like 2 slides ago, but yeah, so he's kind of like he's an object of the state because he's doing what like the law system wants him to do, but also like kind of he's this like receiver of perversion because like he's enacting the possibility for like the crowd to kind of like have perverse pleasure. And then this is a little like wink, but Blank sign of ownership over Jacob's, like he gives him his necklace, and then when another prisoner sees the necklace, they're like, oh, like that means you're, like I could do the same with you, like it kind of like puts him in this position of like submission and objecthood. Yeah, and then more than the old taboos, this form of power demanded constant, attentive, and curious presences from its exercise. It presupposed proximities, it implied a physical proximity, and an interplay of intense sensations. There was undoubtedly an increase in effectiveness and an extension of the domain controlled, but also a sensualization of power and a gain of pleasure. So this is another quote from the Foucault reading, kind of like I wanted to juxtapose it to the pleasure that the cop that's kind of like trying to get a confession out of them is clearly having. So it's like, anyways, that pleasure of sadism, masochism. Yeah, so that's it for my statement. Then there's questions. I don't know, I think we should do like a round of everybody's statements and then go back to questions, or maybe not. I don't know what everybody else thinks.
I feel like it makes more sense to just, because your brain is already in it, if that's okay with everyone.
Totally.
Are you cool to answer questions now?
Yeah, I have. I copy pasted the questions that were on Moodle, but I think someone didn't put theirs. So I'll start with the ones that I copy pasted, and then
we can also just go through and like ask
we can
too,
say
like if there's any context or like things in your statement that people want to reference.
Oh yeah, totally.
Off that. Okay, cool.
Perfect.
Yeah, I can go first if that's cool with everyone. Cool. Yeah, first of all, that was super interesting. I really like the PowerPoint. I wish that I had thought of that. Yeah, I think there's a lot interesting going on with like pain and intimacy, and also like the voyeurism that is occurring with like the audience watching that happen on screen. My question specifically is about the role that water plays in that like dynamic between pain and freedom. And you also talked about the public versus the private. And I feel like, I don't know, there's a dynamic of like the water torture that they undergo is like imagined, like it was not a thing that happened in reality. Did I freeze?
Not to me.
Okay. That was just my computer. Yeah, so yeah, my question is, what role does the reoccurring motif of water play in this dance between pain and intimacy and freedom?
Yeah, I think like I saw water a lot as like the symbolism of queerness, and so and so yeah, so it has like, it represents freedom as this like vast, ultimately it's what kills them, and so it's like this release, like their death is like bittersweet because ultimately it's their liberation, but also their death, and yeah, I think there's like a lot of like the sex scenes where there is like liquid and water, and so that's it like symbolizes this sort of like freedom and this like liquid that can't be contained, but then the effort of trying to contain it too, like, you know, like their torture scenes is like they're in this contained body of water and they're being tortured by it, um and like they're, you know, they're in the sex scene right before they get caught, they actually fill a barrel with water, like there's this hose coming out and they're filling it, like that's what happens like right before one of the other prisoners catches them. So I don't know, I think definitely water symbolizes this sort of like, again, this exchange of like freedom but also of containment, and like that's kind of like the whole, I guess, dynamic of like surveillance and power, and that's how like it functions. So I think it's like a metaphor for all of that. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the questions. I think so.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
No, great. Thank you.
My question to you will be like, do you think that it's clever for a movie to have all of these like ideologies and symbolisms in like the same film, or do you think that maybe it can like push an audience away from the movie or confuse it, or do you think that it's fair for a movie to also have all of this presented in the work?
Mm-hmm. I think it depends on the audience. Like, you know, it's not like it's an independent movie. I don't think this is like the kind of movie that would make it to like the box office and be like, oh, like it sold like 1 million, blah blah blah. But I don't know, at least for like people that like getting nerdy about films, or like will really read into a film as metaphors. Um, I think it's interesting to have a lot of like different lines of like symbolism that people can try and decode. But yeah, I don't think it's for everyone for sure. But I think that's like a conscious choice of like the director, and then, you know, it will definitely drive people away, but it'll also attract another kind of interest, than like other than entertainment, let's say, like more of like a uh an object of study kind of.
So I have a question for you as well.
Yeah.
So do you like, I didn't post it in the forums, but have you noticed a contrast in the BDSM coming from the state versus coming from class? Like class blind does use a knife on Jacobs and other forms of violence, but yeah, where do you separate the consent aspect from their relationship versus what the state inflicts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on it, like with the notion of consent. I think that's like the major distinction. I kind of put it at the beginning of my PowerPoint. I forgot that was the title for another slide, but on like consensual and unconsensual consensual pain exchanges as roads to pleasure. Wait, I lost the Zoom page. No. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I think that's it. It's really like a thing of consent. But then again, like it's not a consensual like knife play that happens in their like first encounter either. But I think for sure Jacobs is kind of like seeking blank through like, um you know, like he doesn't stop seeing him, or like doesn't, like, it's kind of like he's enduring this for him because he chooses to. And I think that's another distinction, is that like Jacob's character like doesn't want to endure the pain caused by the state. Like it's for him it's unconsensual, and he's like unable to endure that kind of pain. And that's why also he's like, you know, he is a gay prisoner, like, you know, like that's another way for him to be like, yeah, I'm not gonna endure the pain of straightness and like play as straight, you know, like I will endure the pain to of being queer because I'm like getting, I guess, like, anyways, like he's engaging in sodomy without like lube and stuff like that, and that's another kind of pain. But then, so yeah, I think it's like choosing for who to endure pain for.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is, well, the first one that I asked you on the journal was in relation to what makes all these like BDSM stuff a perversion by principle, like how perversion manifests in this movie particularly, or in contrast with other movies that we saw, like is it like it's kind of sadomasochistic as you argue, but is it like, do you feel it is like kind of soft, or do you feel it is like a little bit like more technical or more metaphorical? And second, I wanted to know a little bit more on on one of the things you say about their death being bittersweet. What
Okay,
does
okay. I'm gonna start with the first one. You might have to repeat the second one because my memory is very not good short term. But the perversion of it, I think like the fact that I compared it to like the state like public torture and stuff like that is because I think BDSM, one of its main roles for like its community is creating rituals where otherwise unacceptable behaviors or kind of pleasures would not be accepted. And in this context, everybody that's in this like situation is consenting to this, and that, like, you know, but like the state does this without really like, it imposes this sort of like, oh, here you go, like this is, you know, like we're gonna torture and punish this. But like no one's really consenting to it. But ultimately, like the crowd is getting pleasure, but like yeah, I think like there's definitely like a comparison between these like rituals of like acceptable perversion and like enjoying pain that BDSM does very well. I mean, not everybody, but in an ideal scenario, of course, everybody does it consensually. And was there another part to that question? The first one?
no, is the
Okay.
why did you say that their death was bittersweet?
Oh yeah. Yeah, because it's like they don't have to hide anymore. They don't, there's no fear. You know, like their whole dynamic is built a lot on fear. And at the end, once they're condemned and they're standing at the boat, like they look at each other and it's like this sort of like very calm embrace of like, yeah, like we're bound to death and by death. Like, you know, it's a very like kind of like the sexist tragedy like last concept that we brought up. It's like this Romeo Juliet tragedy of like we're gonna die together, but like we you know they die as their true selves in a way, but they die. So that's why I see it as like bittersweet. Yeah, thank you everyone for your questions.
I can go next. Well, just to catch up on the thing about perversion and all that, like okay, so yeah, basically my thesis, or like the main idea that I want to like get my head around, it's like advance a little bit on this idea of perversion and some, so this like sort of like masochist metaphors that are in the movie, and in relation to the metaphors of containment that are present throughout all the narrative, you know, by like by principle that these people are slaves, so they are being contained against their will, even though if they are not in a particularly natural or historically accurate system of slave containment. Um, so the main idea from which I began thinking about this movie was that these people are like stuck in a sort of universe that makes no sense before the anachronisms that are present, you know. So there's all these like post-industrial objects that are present in the film again and again and again. And there are two particular types of post-industrial objects. are the post-industrial objects of containment, of industrial containment, such as the concrete pipe, the concentration fence camp. I don't know if you notice when next to the pipe, to the water pipe, where they fuck and where they feel the metal barriers, there's like a concentration camp, a concentration camp fence. And there is also the post-industrial objects of calculation and data, like data transmission. Like they have like a spreadsheets. They have what do they have? Well, they have like, of course, the typewriters, all sort of like office gadgetry, and also like the police officer, which is also like a sort of like post-industrial figure, you know, of control, of policing. So this situates these people in a universe that is already post-industrial, and that like inherently means that these slaves are pretty much useless as slaves, because slavery ends when machines and take over the capital production and accumulation that slaves made available, you know, for as part of colonization. So this will like sort of mean that these people are being contained in some sort of like for other sort of fashion. And well, this brings me back to my idea of what sort of containment it's being played with here. And like that leads me to the unfolding of my idea. And I will begin by jumping into the question that Oli asked me on the journal post, about the idea that the film deals with containment. And the question was, how does the use of physical geography play into the dynamics of containment? How does the geography symbolize the containment of the characters? What significance of the land, island, and water? Well, to begin with, obviously water is like the thing, the thread that leads the whole narrative, you know, like it's like particularly how water plays here as a sort of containment geographically is obviously these guys are in an island that is being suspended from time. So water at the geographical level is keeping these people stuck in time, in a universe when there is a world outside already. Like there's beyond that water where the island is, there is already a world that has left them behind. Like there's already industrial objects that come into the island and go outside the island. Nothing seems to come out of the island really, but you see how they have objects that don't belong to that island, like the radio and all that sort of stuff. And in a lot of scenes you can see how in the background there's entire like fucking cities, you know, like there's like a bay with a lot of like buildings, you know. So in this sense, the containment that the water plays at the spatial geographical level of that universe is that it contains them in a suspended time. Yeah, like a jail sort of stuff, but more like if they were like in a reality show type of Iceland. That's how I see it. And then obviously like back to you were saying about what you were saying, Pierina, about the role of water and containment. And I also see it like as a metaphor of something that has no form, yet it needs to be contained to some with some tension, because if not, there is total chaos or some sort of stuff. I think that the metaphor for water is that the idea of something that deforms naturally and that flows with any sort of control. And that also like relates to why these people have not enough language available to make sense of their condition, to call themselves a certain way, to describe the ways they feel about each other, or about how they see each other as either as humans or as monsters, you know, like their form is not definite. but also I also feel like the water is present obviously in like the most crucial in the most crucial moments of the movie. Like let's say like they, to begin with, like all what they do is just go fill the barrel with water. That's literally their job as slaves, which is obviously like there's nothing. It's the symbol. Like I don't know what it's a symbol for. If someone has like a, I think you said it might be like filling barrels with meaning. That makes a lot of sense. But then they're like next to this like water pipe, right? And they're always alone, and it's kind of like weird because you don't see a lot of times slaves being alone just to fuck. Like that is not particularly accurate. Yet these guys are left alone all the time, even that they can even like fuck and they can like run away, you know, like if they could, if they wanted, or if they believe so, they could, as any other prisoner has done it before, just try to swim out of the island. If they are gonna die drowned anyways, because that's the constant punishment that they are mechanizing. Imagine dying in the water, right? So if you're gonna die drowned anyway, why don't you escape with your lover in like trying to swim to the other side of the sea, right? So the fact that they don't do that also, I feel, is some sort of kind of like symbolism or metaphor in the movie. And lastly, the last point that I want to touch on is the idea of suffocation and imagination and escape. I think that it is not made clear at the end of the movie if they were actually imagining that torture, or if each of them actually imagines and makes their own torture real as they imagine it. So like for me, I don't know what you think, but for me it's ultimately not clear if the ultimate suffocation was the water thing, or the FBI CIA type of torture, the back here, you know, which is obviously like a very like postmodern like symbolic type of torture, you know, like masking someone and suffocate them. But it seems that Jacobs imagines that sort of torture, while Blanc is mechanizes another sort of torture. And they both of these tortures are like a sort of, if they're being mechanized by their imagination, they are serving some sort of escape from some type of punishment that is being actual real. So I don't know what is yeah, I don't know what is has play at play with those like suffocation torture scenes. Maybe if somebody wants to elaborate more on that later. And that's it. Any questions?
Like someone else wrote about repetitive work. I don't want to like mix two presentations in the same, but like what do you see in the current prison industry versus the old colonial slavery model?
I really don't know what to think about it. Well, I don't know what to say precisely, but there's much to think about it, obviously. To begin with, I don't think that this movie is particularly about slavery and like imprisonment as much as it tries to. I think it's kind of more put as a type of like play in it, you know. Even I feel like the movie also kind of like resembles a play. I feel like it's kind of fucked that like you know, slavery still exists to perform like illegal tasks that not even machines can do, which means like there is already like wretched bodies that like have to perform some sort of gross mechanical tasks that not even a machine is capable of. And there's some sort of like flesh like corruption at play in the fact that slavery still exists and it's trying to be put underneath as something that does not exist, because like there is like no technology will be enough for humankind to get completely rid of slavery, it seems, because we have all the systems that made the abolition of slavery possible, yet why there's still slavery, right? Like there is like ships filled with people that they don't want to be there, and they get paid shit, and like, you know, it's slavery. And also like the prison complex, you know, like the fact that a lot of industries like depend on the free labor slavery of camps, and also like the type of like imprisonment that is not particularly productive, like the concentration camps, for example, or like the detention camps for immigrants. I don't know. I wonder if there's like I wonder if like where to take this, like believe, like putting in this, like why is this thing that human like to contain humans in that grotesque and in these like systems of like human annihilation. Like I don't know what to think about that, but it's a good comparative here to make.
Thank you.
I have a question that I posed in the chat. I was curious about like what if there's like an action or like the kind of labor that they're doing. You said like they're picking flowers, they're filling barrels with water, they're like cracking stones. And I was wondering if you saw these as like if they're technically an illusion of labor, why those specific actions, if that question is like interesting to you. Yeah, like is there like, do you read another, like is there another reading for you of like the cracking of the stones, the filling the barrels, and yeah.
So yeah, your question on the representation of labor. Well, I feel like there's a kind of I'll have like to like think more about what sort of like metaphors are being incorporated into the narrative by these particular actions. Like at the top of my head, I can imagine stuff. For example, the stone cracking. Now it's like, for me, that's just literally just like a joke about like how useless and meaningless they are condemned, like they're cursed, you know, like some sort of like Sisyphus type of task of literally just like meaninglessness embodied, you know, like cracking a fucking stone every day has no fucking function or anything, and you will do the same again, so you're condemned like to a nothingness. And it's also like part of like, you know, like cracking something, it's also part of like body breaking or body transforming fragmenting, which like kind of makes me to the other sort of like task, which is to move one part of a body of water to another body of water, what from the pipe to the barrel. We never know what are these. I'm not sure, but I don't remember what are they using this water for, because they never seem to be in any sort of camp or like producing any like fertile grounds or cotton or anything. So I don't know, the idea of one of the transformation, the body transformation of water to another, to adjust itself to another body. I feel there's something like to look into it, but I pretty much see that's as a tactic of escape. Like the only reason why they are condemned to fill barrels with water until eternity is just for they can like mechanize like escape, in which they get in when they get into another body, you know, the little room, and they are also able to transform or to flow as water would. And the other labor that they perform is they're fishing like It's just like a time contemplation type of task. You know, this is not like productive fishing. This is just like as your uncle fishes or whatever. You know, like they're just like, and like that. I don't know, that sort of fishing is always like a metaphor for endurance and patience and believing that there's something that you're gonna get by committing to do that very passionately. I mean, in literature and in other, like that idea of fishing that way has to do with patience and endurance. And what the other one? Sorry, I'm gonna finish soon. And the last one, what was it? Oh yeah, the flowers. Okay, this one is probably the most important, and I don't fully get it. But yeah, of course, like the role of the Proteus flower in here is like crucial, and I really didn't got like enough time to think or investigate about what is this symbol of playing with the flower does. But yeah, thank you. And the other question that I received was, where in the movie, by Daniel, where in the movie have you noticed this feeling of tension? What elements of the film do you think are used to give this sense of containment, and do they work? Well, I think yeah, pretty much my
Yeah, I think you already explained it. Sorry for the, because I
yeah.
didn't hear. So you explained it perfectly. And I think I want to change my question. Like, for example, if I'm understanding correctly, like we are saying here, like all of these metaphors, like in all of the symbolisms, but also like you mentioned this historical, like on accuracy or like this change of the of reality, for example. And my question will be, now that I hear your statement and that you presented what components give this to the movie, what do you think? Do you think that, for example, for a narrative or for a movie, it's okay, like for example, okay, you're giving a message and the message that you're trying to give in a movie represents that your film will contain all of these historical inaccuracies? Do you think that that's valid, or do you think that maybe the decision of a director should be like to stick to the other components of historical accuracy?
Well, I personally like movies that they go like in exceeding detail to what people can look into. I think it's more a matter of how you treat that as an art and not very vaguely as, I'm just gonna put a shit ton of reference and whoever gets them, or like if you don't get these movies, probably because you haven't read enough about like history of institutionalization of desire and institutionalization of control, blah blah blah, you know. But I feel like a rich movie can a rich artwork can be a threshold of different sorts for any person that can find beauty or potential knowledge in it. So I think it's more a matter of having know how to make good art and having how to make good movies, that you can get away with doing these sort of very risky cliche things, you know, as doing like anachronisms or like camp scenarios, or you know, but like ultimately a lot of people see that and think that is like super cringe. I particularly feel that in the movie, I think it's a little bit camp charged, but I think it kind of like it tries to be that, you know. Also, another thing that caught my attention is that the movie is from 2003, right? But it appears to be filmed before, like the movie is already not being filmed as if it was a 2003 movie. Like 2003 movies, they don't look like with that like old ass filter. Like the movie looked like maybe like a 80s, I don't know. But yeah, that was a last comment I wanted to make. Thank you.
Yeah, that question is kind of what my statement is about. So I don't know if this is like a good spot to move on. I feel like that's a good segue. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you talked about this kind of like out of timeness of the film and how it exists in this like sort of absurd bubble where it doesn't really exist in like any historical period specifically. And yeah, what I'm interested in is it really upends that like typical historical grounding of like historical fiction. And it was the first time I'd ever seen it done like so overtly in a film. And I study studio arts and sexuality studies, and so I am interested in how and why the directors did this, and how this, like, I'm phrasing it as like a queering of historiography, subverts dominant systems and gazes, and what lessons we can like learn from that and I can apply to my own art and writing. And I'm going to be talking about this by focusing on specifically the repeated 1960s costuming. I think because it's like pretty recognizable as belonging to that period of time. And also it's like very historically significant to South Africa because that's during apartheid. I'll talk pretty quickly, but I don't know, it doesn't feel like we're super strict on the 5 minutes. So yeah, the use of these anachronistic costumes collapses time, preventing the audience from reading the film as a concrete, static recreation of a historical period. And it disrupts the myth that any such accurate recreation of the past is possible or productive, which I think is a very colonial idea, right? The idea that we can gaze upon something and see it as like an objective whole truth. And the out of place costuming highlights the artifice inherent in historical retelling and cinema at large. Additionally, these costuming elements place our contemporary audience closer to the events of the film, drawing historical through lines from now to then. We're not as, we recognize the way that people are clothed, and I think that creates less distance between the audience and the characters. So Sarah Ahmed talks about how straightness is created, and that cultural institutions have the power to act as straightening devices that restrict the spaces and paths that our bodies can occupy. One of the cultural institutions that does this is cinema, and as a part of his cinema, historical fiction. And I think a lot of the time historical fiction can reinforce that straight line of heterosexual existence. It can reinforce a linear view of history and concretize ideas about heterosexuality as natural and like pre-existing. This is why I propose that the use of anachronism in Proteus functions to queer history. It breaks down that linear objective truth to history, and adds an element of absurdity that opens up the possibilities of like who, when, where. I'm going to talk mostly about 2 examples, which is the 1960s typewriters that bookend the film, and the South African apartheid era cop costuming, which I like looked it up. That is like specifically what they wore to like enforce and police apartheid in South Africa. The reading we did from Somerville highlights that modern categories of homosexuality and race are shaped through models of interracial and homosexual desire. And this film as a whole discusses that relationship. And I think that the use of anachronism is really critical to that, like illustrating how racism and homosexuality as concepts like emerge at the same time and together. The typewriters draw attention to the process of recording sexual relations between like interracial sexual relations. It draws attention to how their lives are recorded, translated, concretized, interpreted through a historical imperial gaze. And similarly, the costuming of the cops illustrates direct lines between the 18th century tactics of domination and later systems of control in the 1960s, collapsing them as one and the same, and highlighting how these structures discipline and regulate the characters' sexualities. And also, I wanted to bring up, this is like not really in the scope of what I'm talking about, but I think it's interesting. I think that the role of the typewriters, which is like 3 1960s white women, I think it evokes like a very particular type of white womanhood. And I think that it poses interesting questions about like how white women in the 60s and now are like simultaneously subjugated, but also very complicit in imperial systems. And that was just something interesting I was thinking about, felt relevant to mention. But yeah, moving on, we talked about the imperial gaze on Copland, and that's grounded in the assumption of like taxonomic truth of race and sex being fundamental to Western cinema. And this imperial gaze refuses to admit its own existence. And it's also like contingent on its invisibility, on its like refusal that it's a thing, that it exists. And I think that the anachronistic costuming in the film positions the colonizer and the imperial gaze as foreign to the rest of the aesthetic of the film, and it makes it very visible. It makes the mechanisms of the imperial gaze at work in policing and in historical recording very visible, and it draws our attention to the imperial gaze and puts it in somewhat of a fragile position. And secondly, like you mentioned, the over-the-top, like, I would say camp, there's definitely a lot of a camp aesthetic in this film, makes, I think in the case of the cop especially, the character feel a bit absurd. He's not just like visible as this kind of like foreign figure, but is like non-identifiable with the audience, like made into a caricature. Like we're not going to relate to his position at all because it's so weird that he's in the movie, and it blocks the audience from identifying with the position of the colonizer. Ahmed also emphasizes all of the labor involved in becoming straight. And just as the costuming draws attention to the imperial gaze and the workings of the imperial gaze, I think it also draws attention to the work of straightness, or like the labor involved in straightness, and the labor of the like systems and structures which mold individuals into a straight line. Like straightness doesn't occur naturally, and the break from the aesthetic of the film highlights that imposition. It highlights like the intrusiveness of these straightening devices. So yeah, all in all, I would argue that the anachronistic costuming in Proteus has powerful and complex effects in the film, and it disrupts many of the dynamics of domination and control of plain cinema. I think also it definitely alienates certain audiences for sure. Like I think a lot of people are like turned off by it, and that is an important question of like, I don't know, to what extent are you like making your art accessible versus like making your art very thinky? Some things need to be thought about a lot, and I think that's important to like get people to discuss things and think about things. But it's also like, I mean, a lot of people are like, this is stupid, why am I, this is just like a low budget film, you know? Yeah, that was all, if there's questions.
Well, I think you already asked, I think you already answered my question, which was like, what made this sort of like time disruption, queer historiographic mode? But yeah, so yeah, well, about you pretty much like distinguish the like historiography is in itself just like bringing into question these linear methods of like history, world making, world views. But yeah, I think you answer it by the thing about that you say about these elements bringing a sense of absurdity that allows us to reconsider like this linearity. And on another thing about like the costumes, I think that was a very important point that you clarified for my question. Thank you.
I had written like two questions because I like they were very specific. So I don't know if there's one in particular. There was one about the distortion of the different like transcription and transmission technologies, and the other one was more specifically about the written word versus the typed word, and how like yeah, like why do you think there was a juxtaposition between those two technologies of like putting a word to something?
Yeah, I really like the second question. I think that there is a lot going on there, so I'm gonna try to like concisely articulate my thoughts. But first of all, I think that it is pointing to something similar that the anachronisms are doing, which is like the costuming anachronisms, which is collapsing time and creating that comparison between different historical periods. And I think it's specifically comparing the mechanisms that those different historical periods had at their disposal for control and regulation of bodies. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit, but I think that it really highlights the effects of like the technological revolution on record making and history and like information and how those things regulate bodies. I think that we have all these images of cursive writing, and those I think still hold in them a lot of like traces of like the body and traces of the person. You have like gesture and movement like baked into those things, and when you transition to text, there's a lot of like impersonableness to that. And I think as a consequence, it's positioned as more objective, like more firmly situated in the scientific imperial gaze. And so that's what I read that as, like an interesting, like that technological revolution, I think has impacted very deeply the way that, more legible, true. The way that like regulation and discipline happens. Like if we're talking about Foucault's ideas on like discourse and like talking about sexuality, and like a lot of that discourse is disseminated through text, and I think that like really impacts things. It speeds up, like you can make copies of things, it speeds up how fast certain information is disseminated, can reach much wider, can be much like all-encompassing. And then I think we've reached a new period of technology, like a new era of technology, the digital era, where those implications are compounded even further, like with celebrity culture and social media and the ways that we talk about sexuality and how it's regulated and how discourse occurs has like changed even more. There's like another layer of that. So yeah, a lot there. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks.
So my question goes into language and the different tongues used in the movie, like the Bushman dialect, Dutch, English, and I forget the other one. But do you have you thought about what is lost through language and through translation in the movie?
Yeah, I think that my answer is kind of twofold to this. Dutch and English, very much position. I feel like they're like almost interchangeable in the film. They're both languages of the colonizer. And Bushman, on the other hand, is like very poorly understood by the imperial forces, and thus like poorly recorded, misrepresented, reduced. The lives of like the colonized people are very tokenized and like viewed through the imperial gaze, because they don't have access in that way. But also, and this was a thing I think the prof mentioned during our discussion, I think that within that like confusion and that misunderstanding, there's a strategy for resistance that the colonized people employ. They're able to, like, to an extent, to block the imperial gaze. He like tricks the botanist by just like lying to him, because he can do that because that's something he's afforded by like speaking this language that the colonizer doesn't understand. And so I think in some way it like offers a level of protection or like a strategy for resisting the imperial gaze, which is interesting. It creates that like distance, that like inability to identify with. And it does the same thing I think that the like absurd cop costume does, is it places the colonizers like this like weird like I don't know, like almost a joke. I think like we're supposed to be laughing at the botanist in that instance.
I don't know. My question will be like, if you think that also the story gets affected by, o sea, do you think that they stay, for example, all of these anachronisms and all of these um on the components of the film itself, or do you think that it also affects that they can also go beyond that and like also affect what happens to the characters? Like for example, like maybe like I liked what you say about like how this campness and these like costumes like make more possibilities like for things to open up, which is like what like queer studies is about, like opening it up, like cracking it, so like things up. Do you think that this movie does something like beyond also that those like uh physical objects? Do you think that there's like actions in the movie that it's like, okay, this it's also replicating itself inside of the story, like with the characters? Or do you think that, for example, the narrative it's or like the plot it's more conventional on a certain way, or what do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I yeah, I don't know. I do think in some ways that the end of the film, like I think to describe it as bittersweet is very accurate, and I think I feel the same way about um how it functions to like queer things, because it does follow that traditional film structure of like things are quite resolved to an extent at the end of the film, which it doesn't feel like super along the lines of like queering things. But at the same time, like they die together, and that did feel like, okay, you know, that's not aligning super strongly with like our expectations as an audience, but at the same time the film is it's definitely wrapped up, you know. And I mean that could partially be because they were following like an actual historical record and that event happened. They were executed together. But yeah, and I think there's also interesting implications of like, you know, why this specific story was chosen, and like, you know, all the implications of like telling a story of like real people who existed. Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that question, but it's an interesting one. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's exactly where I want to like what the answer that I was expecting, like to go back to the ending and like to say, well, I don't know, like, you know, like there's still this queerness like in the story, like did they give me what I wanted or not? I don't know. Is this new or is this a recycled thing from other types of films? But yeah, pretty much it. Thank you.
Danielle, did you want to go next, or do you mind if I do?
I really don't mind, whatever you prefer. Tell me.
Okay, I'll go now. So, do we have enough time with the Zoom meeting?
It hasn't given me the 10-minute cap, so you can go and I'll type in chat when there's like 5 minutes left.
Thank you. I think that's well enough time. So I chose this film because I'm already well, through my major, I've looked at neo-imperialist influences like homo nationalism discourse over the global South. I feel like there's a good example today of Israel claiming its place as the only gay accepting Western place and posing everybody around them as outdated and as primitive. So so in the movie itself, I've identified several roles that our characters perform to highlight the colonial heteronormativity that vilifies the relationship of our two main characters, and also the motives and the gaze of Nigel Virgil Nivon, the botanist. Like in my point of view, he embodies the imperial gaze when he like paints class, for example. So in technology of gender, Dolores explained the engineering of the machines, citing Foucault's work, but also explaining how Foucault's discourse theory doesn't explain how male and female genders are constructed from a different, from a sexual difference point of view. So in her words, if gender representation are social positions which carry differential meanings, then for someone to be represented and to represent oneself as male or female implies the assumption of the whole of those meaning effects. So during the Victorian regime and through Christianism, like this cisgender heterosexual white man came up as the standard identity, and then race and gender were constructed from that model. And in checklist form, the male script that one has to adhere to includes vilifying the other, certain professions, heteronormativity. And Jacobs, the Dutchman, he was imprisoned when the movie started because of his gayness. Class blank, when he admits it to the public, to the court, he gets in prison. He gets killed for sodomy, and then the botanist avoids all that because he never admits to his failure to adhere to the male script in the colonial setting. So going deeper into the botanist, we he also embodies the class structure within the gay community, like George Chauncey, someone that was referred in one of our readings. He refers to gay bourgeois in the New York City in early 20s, going slumming and marking the red light district and the proletariat districts as markers of depravity and an absence of the harder heterosexual structure that they enforce with their own lives. And in his escaping from the raids back home, he shows how his financials enables his movement over the rest of the community, who probably got arrested in the gay venues that in Dutchland, I think, right? Nigel was also a Dutchman. So moreover, at the start of the movie, when Class Blank gets arrested, he suggests that he doesn't go through the same process as a cow thief, and say, oh, company policy says he has to go through trial. And then during the trial, for his gayness, the botanist jumps in again and says, oh, well, he could be my apprentice, he could come with me, when the South African had already asked that like years and years later in the movie, earlier in the movie. So that shows how the white complex that the botanist has. Sonny Yu defines that as a mentality that encourages individuals to act as saviors of those incapable of self-autonomy. She also details how the repetition of saving is in itself a patronizing act and reinforces the systemic disparities in a given society. And finally, also the practice of white savior also delves into the colonial disparity between the global north and global south of the colonial era, and a series of racist beliefs that non-white people cannot achieve their safety without the help of whiteness or a higher power. Like that ties into the gender the sexual difference, in that anything divergent from the white supremacist standard cannot achieve success. So I'm gonna skip over some of my historical analysis and dive into the imperial gaze that Nigel has with Blank. Like we see this when the camera pans to him painting with a tribal suit. Like throughout the movie, we see the literature of the botanists and like, oh, this is the Hottentot, this is the Indian, this is the Caucasian, European, and like this is what he embodies, like the construction of sexuality and racism through through like pseudo a priori pseudoscience at the time. So all of that is reflected through the permeability of colonial patriarchy and white supremacy in the anachronism of the movie. That's been delved into well enough, so I'll skip over that. But I will talk about the close shots that at first, when Class introduces themselves to another inmate, it pans to them closer, and it's like, oh, if you, what's your last name? Blank. If you wanna be Blank, you gotta scrub harder. Like that's to show the intimacy between them. But for the rest of the movie, that's more for the, like the close shots are reserved exclusively to for the two lovers. Like, oh, it's gonna be gay now. Same thing with the shaky shots, like handheld shots and or the tilted ones in the heat of the moment to show like the the brain fog that's going in the heat of it all. So that ends my my opening statement. Thank you for sitting through it.
Just to let everyone know, there's 4 minutes and 30 seconds left for the meeting. So maybe we can do one question or prefer to end it now and start another one.
We can do one now and quickly. Is there one in the chat or anyone wants to go first?
Yeah, I can. I have like a different one than you. Very much covered the one that I posted in the forum, but yeah, what did you make of at the end, like all three queer characters are in the water chamber together, which was very interesting to me because I thought at first they were doing this like, oh, they're very different because of class, right? Like their experiences of queerness are very different because of class, but then at the end we see them all together. I don't know if you had thoughts on like what that means or the implications of that.
Well, in the end, with the bittersweetness that's been talked about, like they look at each other and there's this sort of relief that they're gonna escape that structure that antagonizes them. Whereas what's his name? Virgil Niven, the botanist, like he doesn't escape it. He stays in his marriage, he stays alive and gets to experience all the norms he doesn't adhere to inside. So that's where he kind of in the same boat as them as they escape it. So does that answer your question? Okay.
I can jump in with my question.
Please do.
Which was, oh my God, sorry, my Moodle just logged out. Someone else can go. I need to look it up on Moodle. I forgot.
Oh, I can put it.
Okay.
I wanted to know what's, for example, like your intake or your perspective of like Blank, for example, also being in the middle of precisely or in almost like taking advantage of precisely these two dynamics where we with the botanist gay man, Blank knows that that could be his way of escaping, no? Like homosexuality there can like save him actually and like take him out of there. And with Jacobs, it's like another, like another game and another role of dynamics and power. Like I want to like to know what do you think of that?
I think that like as the relationship between the botanist and class highlights the like risk disparities that the pseudoscience at the time is creating, I think him being so smart and playing into like the gaze of the botanist and getting like some alcohol here, some and maybe a way of escaping when he pleads for it. I think that's how the movie challenges those, like that primitive ideology of Caucasian versus otherness. Yeah.
My question, should I ask it now?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
ready.
What purpose do you think the sacrifice of like Blank and Jacobs like played? Like I think you touched a little bit on that, but I mean like what like do you think that ultimately freed him more, or like after, like I guess thinking about it afterwards in the movie, like yeah.
I think the like 180 at the end should have gotten more drama, a more dramatic setup that it did, because throughout the whole movie we have like Jacob being like, oh, what are we? You look at me and we don't interact, and so for him at the end to admit that, oh, I'm with him, I'm gay too, and like I think it would have given more bitter to that ending. Having sorry, can you repeat your question? I think I went on a tangent.
Yeah, no, I meant like what do you think that sort of confession and the fact that the two of them died, like because it was this sort of like triangle kind of dynamic, like how did that affect like the botanist himself? Like do you see it as
Okay.
like he more freed afterwards? Or what, like do you think he would need to find someone else to like kind of become his sort of like toy of desire or stuff like that, or
Like, yeah, I think it does play into it does highlight the celerity of the queer community as more privilege played out, like post the We Demand rally in Canada, and the like integration of queer folks in the army and marriage. Like the way the two characters that admit their queerness stick with each other, like it does speak to like solidarity over privilege and over like self benefits, because that's what all he was. Like he only, like the white savior moments show that it's only when class was going to disappear from him that it's like, oh no, wait, I want him now. And yeah, it shows like the difference between class structure, proletariat solidarity, and what I spoke to earlier, the movement allowed between a certain class and other classes having to stick together. So thank you for your question.
My question is, do you think there is a lot of racial tension, and as in a mode of like fetishizing the other, or is it more about like maybe not like racial, but like class division, like imperial class division, right? Like the white slave, the white like the person that is white but is still not a human, the black, and the bottom is the office, kind of like what like how do you see the fetishization of the other being mechanized in the imperial structure here? Is it very racially tense or not so much? Like, how do you perceive this?
Well, I get to delve into my historical analysis then. Like in the Somerville reading, he recounts Richard von Krafft-Ebing's coining of homosexuality, which coincides with the conception of race and gender in like the rise of social Darwinism and like Lamarck's theory of like inherited traits and bio determinism. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, today's assumptions of ethnic diversity still delves into those concepts of Primitism versus Caucasian, and when you pair that with the moral insanity of the of homosexuality at the time, you see the irony in today's homo-nationalism discourse, looking at the global South countries that still have like sexist and homosexual, homophobic laws, like anti-gay marriage laws or death penalties for gay practices. So you have that white gay gaze today that's looking at this very imperial gaze, but from the other way around, if that makes sense. Like, instead of having back in the days looking at other civilizations that did practice non-normative things. Sorry, I'm brain fog. Like, back in the days, gay and queerness was primitive to Caucasian societies, but now it's heteronormativity and the refusal of gay rights that's primitive. So that's why I see the movie portraying that.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Is that it?
Okay, if you want, I can start my statement now. I don't know if you want to say something else, Adam.
No, thank you for sitting through this.
Thank you. Well, also, yeah, the reason why I chose this film is due to the importance that I see of supporting and giving view to independent cinema, because I think that since it's far away from the mainstream and conventional ways of telling stories, I think that it also has a wider and way more free way of presenting ideologies and narratives, and so and I think that we have covered a lot of them in this statement. So I feel like this is why I also find super interesting and valid and important to keep supporting this type of cinema. And I want to address the first sex encounter between the characters, because I think that that scene has the arguments of Kaplan and Bell of the imperial gaze and eating the other, but I think that the film allows us as audience to also like play with the perspectives of the character that we're looking at or putting ourselves into. And also, like the first thing that I want to address for Kaplan's imperial gaze observation is the comment that she makes about the the camera and how a filmmaker said that um the camera is an artifact that it's made for capturing nothing but reality in the dark continent, epitomizing the colonial confidence. So Kaplan addresses this. And while I was watching again the scene, the sex scene, the first sex scene, I saw that the camera kind of like had this super intense style of I think you mentioned it a little bit also, Adam, in the like handheld and almost like close to documentary. And it's like twirling around the scene and like putting you like in front of the faces of the characters, and it's moving a lot, and it looks kind of like documentary, like a documentary. But still there is something like in the on the aesthetic decision of the cinematography of the lighting, where we cannot see, for example, like the genitalia of the characters, or like we cannot see the full, because there's like these dark spaces that doesn't allow us to see the full thing. And I think that that also prevents this scene for being turned into an exhibition, no? So it has like, I feel like it has this argument, or like this point of like understanding that the camera is used by the white colonizer to use it like that, to like capture and portray like everything, and like, you know. And I think that it invades the scene in that, but also like protects the characters. Kaplan also indicates that the male primitive body, it's feminized and it's oversexed. Feminized because it's close to the castration concept of Freud, and that means that it has like it needs to be mastered or like dominated, like it puts the primitive body in that position. And oversexed because they say that they have a locked libido and like less civilized ID. Here is when I like when the perspective things, I think that like starts to change, because for example we see that the non-white, sorry, character, Blank, is actually the one that it's, for example, on top, and on the bottom it's Jacobs. And also like Blank kind of like make like the first move to initiate the sex, and then Jacobs responded to it. And I don't know, like there's also like this dynamic that I think that links the two of them with this, at least in that scene, or at least in that point of the film, like as oversex, like to the both of them, not only to Blank or not only to Jacobs. And I think that that's the link that connects them both with the otherness, because I think that Jacob is treated as, even though it's white, like his homosexuality makes him being treated as other. O sea, you are with us in the community, like in the slave system and everything, but you are also treated as other because you are white, and also you are homosexual. So that's when I see that, for example, Jacob's character falls into what Kaplan explains of being feminized and being the dominated position, because like, you know, you are going to be on the bottom of the sexual intercourse, and now you are like on the dominated position, and Blank, and they both have this like sex energy creating like in the point. I know that later in the film things change and love enters and a lot of things change later, but in this specific scene, that's what I saw of the perspectives. Also, Bale discusses the point of the sexual intercourse between different races, and he explains that when race is commodified for pleasure, the sexual dynamics can now turn into a reformation of power from the dominating races, no? And here is where in the film we note how then actually like the non-white character Blank is the one with a much dominating energy, where Jacob is, for example, like waiting for him to tell him that that Blank loves him, and like, you know, it's like more after Blank, and Blank it's more like on the dominating we can say energy, maybe. I don't know if that's the word that I want to use. And also Bell mentions that the sexual interactions can signify an attempt by the white or dominant subject to separate himself from their past or oppressive conducts, and that now it's not only seeking for sexual possession, but to be changed by the encounter and by the experience. And I think that again, here, it's an interesting play because it has this argument, but it's like kind of like switched and presented on the same level, because the non-white character, Blanc, it's again the one that it's being oppressive toward Jacobs when it's in front of the people, and like, you know, when it's in front of the community, and like everything like pushes him and says that I don't want to go get water with you. That's right after the sex scene. Blanc says that I don't want to go get water with him because he tried to fuck me or something like that. And I don't know, I also see this perspective when the sexual encounter, like maybe Blanc is also like trying to redeem himself of like being oppressive towards Jacobs, and like it's supporting this argument that Bell um proposes. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about, like really short and simple, of like the two arguments of the two writers that I can see that challenge the audience. I think that you said that, only like it's more challenging to the audience, and it's not more presented like this good, this bad, or whatever. Like it's more opened up, and it's more like, yes, this dynamic exists, but also we have to take in consideration dominance, desire, sexuality, race. Like it's not only shovelled into one thing, it's like presented in different shapes and perspectives where we can like grasp. And I think that's it. I don't know if someone has a question or no.
Yeah, I can jump in. You talked a lot about like Jacobs and Blank's dynamic and how Blank is playing like more this I guess like he's the one more in control in the situation. But I was wondering, how do you kind of see that with Blank's relationship with the botanist? Because it's like like the I guess the idea, not the ideal, but like we would tend to think that the botanist is in charge, and because he's white and he's in a like position of power. But then at one point in the movie, kind of like Blank knows, like he knows that the botanist is into him, and then like his like behavior with him kind of switches. So then like, do you still think that he's kind of the one being like surveilled and like like
Yeah, like the dynamics and everything.
uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I find really interesting about Blanc, and I think I mentioned it a little bit before, that I think that he's like on the middle, where, for example, Jacobs is like, o sea, he has this dominant energy towards Jacobs because he's the white person that is punished by that. So he knows that, and he's like, okay, I can be dominant with you, like I'm eating the other also, like I'm kind of like doing that, and like all of those things. And then with the botanist, for example, I think that he knows that that's the other like face of the coin, where all of this, like the white colonizer and like the botanist has the power towards Blanc. And that's what I think about Blanc, that he knows that, and he's like, okay, with you I have to play like the rules where I'm not the dominant one. But I think that he does that because he even says like, I don't know if it's right after or right before the sex scene, where he says like, yeah, he's gonna help me escape, he's into me, I know it. Like he says that to Jacob. So that's what I also think of Blanc, that it's kind of like in the middle, where in the botanist it's just like, I need to play the rules with you, and that's gonna help me. But with Jacobs, it's more like at the beginning, of course, and like in some of the first attitudes of towards him, it's more like this dominant, like, okay, I can like kind of like use you to see what's going on here and everything, And with the botanist, it's more like, I know that I have to follow the rules, maybe. I don't know.
So my question for you would be, given how like Blank's role in the sex scene challenges the like the predetermined giving roles to race and ethnicities in terms of like power balances. What do you make of him navigating his intersectionality of race and gayness outside of that scene? And it's like, like he doesn't, debate his Africanness, but he does like talk about like wanting a wife with big breasts, and it takes him a while to acknowledge Jacob's with the gift, and talking to him outside of their sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking also about that, also of the next sex scenes and like what were the conversations and all of that. And yeah, I was just thinking of when he says that he's gonna have someone with huge tits, and that, and then Jacob says like, are you gonna marry her tits or what? I don't know. So I think that even Jacob's like being on the dominated dynamic, I think that Jacobs it's also like challenging Blanc with challenges that maybe he didn't know that he had, you know, like, well, yeah, am I gonna marry her tits or am I gonna marry the person? Like, what do I want? What do I, you know? But it's also this, Pierina, like you mentioned, like it's also like this constant um thing of like I'm being reaffirmed that I'm punished by this, like the torture, the pain, and I don't know. So I think that that makes him like hide and like maybe also like I don't know, like, you know, to it kind of like mediates everything. But for me, like the biggest explosion of like, you know, like for example, like we could say like the love between and everything, like the biggest explosion when like, you know, like the most romantic moment for me, it will be when he says on the court that he's, yeah, that he also did it, like that he can, that I don't know how he said it, but like he says a word that then is translated. And for me, that's like the most, like the biggest, we could say, proof of love. And in the other senses, I think that he hides from everything because he has all of these things that even we are seeing on the film that are being repeated. And I think that he's also being challenged on all of those things. I don't know. I don't know. Did I answer your question or did I just like dissociate it and say things that
I mean, you made me like have the epiphany right now that it's kind of like Jacobs and that environment allows him to challenge those ethnic power balances, and take the dominant side. So that's what you did there. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. Okay. Yeah, my question is, so you touched on there is like quite a lot of self-awareness in the film that you know, about like the dynamics of voyeurism and like the camera movements that are happening while they're having sex, but even the prof said like, oh, this is like a thinky movie, but it's also sexy. And like looking at the cover of the movie, like it's like, you know, it's got like sex appeal. It's like, I don't know, like marketed to an extent to like be kind of sexy and like, I mean, specifically I think to a queer audience. But I don't know, I guess that you could argue that. But yeah, I don't know. What do you make of that and like how that interacts with everything that like this is also as an audience, like we are definitely getting a level of voyeuristic pleasure from viewing this. And yeah, I don't know. It's kind of open-ended, but
Yeah, I mean,
One
I
second,
think
one second.
it,
Daniel, just before you answer that, I'm just gonna drop mine because I also wanted to ask something very similar, just for you to elaborate on both.
okay, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
like because you mentioned a lot of stuff about well, about the cinematography takes cuts of the film. In particular, I was just curious about that too. So like in relation to the gays, how do you feel like technically this movie achieves its like melodramatic character only through the function of the takes and the shots? How are they different one from another in the way they incorporate the emotion or the sex scene? And lastly, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the final scene? Like just recovering what Oli was mentioning about the voyeurism in the movie, for like that is also always present, right? Like we're always looking at the officer looking at the guy suffer, or and you know, the looking is always present. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the last scene where the guy like looks through the binoculares, and they just to see them like die? Like, why? Well, what the fuck does that mean? Like, what does he do that? Like, it's some sort of like, for me, it's some sort of like masochistic metaphor, but it's also like way more deep than that. And I wanted to like know like how you relate it with the other type of cinematographic shots.
Yes.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. O sea, it's, o sea, especially like that's what I mean when I say like independent films. Like we can like, I don't know, like stretch a rubber band and like to, I don't know, like there's a lot of things. I was, for example, also thinking like how much of that is also like film decisions or narrative decisions and how much is, for example, like a budget decision, you know, like I wanted to do this, but I cannot solve it. So maybe we're just gonna do, o sea, that also, o sea, that's what I love about independent cinema that we can all like dive and like it's more interpretation. And for example, what you say about Olive, like, and well, also too, Pablo, about the voyeuristic thing. I think that it goes also like a little bit. I like beyond that on a sense that we can also like kind of like at a certain level like see ourselves. Like I was watching it and I was like, yeah, I think that I have also done that when I know that being gay sometimes save you, sometimes you have to be hidden, and then you have these reformations and all. So there's also like this pleasure of seeing that that hooks you of voyeuristic into the sexual. Yeah, so of course we see the super attractive characters and like and there's o sea, I know that I talk about how the lining covers but also reveals because it's like this orangey light and they're like naked or everything. And yeah, I think that it's also like doing that because I think that the film understands really really deeply the dynamics of sex. So it's just like, yeah, on the surface we can see, like, for example, on the film cover they're on the beach kissing and everything, and it's just, yeah, we can be like, okay, this is something that it's going to be a sexual experience, but I think that it's a sexual analysis. And I think that, yeah, o sea, of course it's going to take advantage of the sexual components of it, of the sexual pleasure. And we're going to take that as a pleasure, but it's actually like also going beyond that, and it's making like a sexual analysis. So it's just like, oh, okay, this hooked me, but now I know that I can go further. And what you say about Pablo, like I know, yeah, you're Pablo, you're not Pablo, you're Emiliano. Ah,
Yeah, I
no.
have got two names.
Ay, sorry,
Yeah.
es que
No,
I
it's
have
good.
like
It's good.
another
Probably
phone.
Emiliano, but I usually go by Emiliano.
Perdón,
No, no
sorry.
te preocupes.
What you say, Emiliano, also like of this voyeurism. I think that it's also like, for example, the botanist saying like it. I feel like he also has certain oppression at some extent, because I think that that's what the movie still wants to talk about. Like we as queers are also the other. So there's not like there's o sea, all of these dynamics can be broken or changed or seen from a different perspective because we are queer. So I feel like although we can all say all of these things of the for the botanist person, and I feel like at the end watching them being killed and just being like, oh my, o sea, all of this happened, and what if I'm the next one? I feel like I see that a little bit like it's, yeah, voyeuristic, like I'm watching in the, yes, binoculares, but it's also like I'm seeing all of these complicated maybe thing that being queer represents. No, I'm seeing all of these things that are super complicated about being queer, and I'm also queer. So am I safe? Am I not? I'm far away from it, but I'm still seeing it. So I don't know, like I'm still not that far away to pretend that it doesn't exist. Like I'm there on the mountain, really, really up, and I'm watching with something that helps me like to watch even closer, because I'm not, I'm not there, but that doesn't mean that I'm not looking at it. So maybe that could like also come back to Pierina's like thing of like he's also being reformed with pain and torture like all the time, even though he's far away from it. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Yay. We did it. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. Unless did anyone have anything that they wanted to add?
Yeah, okay, I think that that's it. And thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you,
Yeah.
Pierina, for the meeting.
No, thank you all for filling out the doodle and coming.